Extending on the Big Ten and the SEC showdown on and off the field, whether that's television networks or football teams on the field or the TV revenue and so forth. Ross Bjork came out with a statement basically just highlighting this entire landscape of the battle for the CFP format and how that's going to impact scheduling, and that Ohio State is lined up the likes of Notre Dame, Texas, and now Alabama and Georgia in the future. And does it make a whole lot of sense to schedule those kind of games if the CFP is just going to stick to a winning percentage formula, just like these teams? And he would love to extend these type of matchups against the best teams in the country. However, does it make sense in the current model? And we need to emphasize big games. So, Tony, where do you stand on all of this?
Well, I stand where Ross Bjork stands, and that is if you go to the 5+11, say goodbye to the big non-conference games, because there's no point in playing those. You're going to be rewarded for winning, so why introduce the possibility of loss to your schedule? So that's the way things are going to go, and so early season college football is going to be very boring. And it's going to be worse and worse and worse. And so if you want exciting non-conference matchups in the month of September, you want the 4-4-2-2-1. And the SEC coaches are against that because it's harder, and there'd be a 9-game SEC schedule that they don't want. So their lives would be more difficult. Whereas if they can just be held to the 8-game schedule and somebody's opinion that the SEC is beautiful and nice and tough, then boom, they're going to get more spots in that 5+11. So Ross Bjork said that pretty much during the press conference, and then afterwards I grabbed him, talked to him a little bit about just like the notion of playing games, like is that a legit possibility? And it is. And then I also said that so if it's 5+11, say goodbye to the Texas games, the Georgia games, and the Alabama games. And he's like, yeah, like there's no point in playing those games because they don't do they don't do you any good. They can only do you harm, because a win over Youngstown State is better than a loss to Georgia in a 5+11. So think about what that means for your non-conference schedule and enjoy your summer.
I'll take the counter approach to that. I think that you look at Ohio State and the years that they play Michigan typically at home, you're not going to have a problem selling those tickets, those season tickets and so on. But a year like this one, if you didn't have Texas on there, you could have some people that would dump out of the season ticket and the season parking and all of that and just choose the 1 or 2 games that they want to go to. But because Texas is on that ticket, you got to get it. And I just remember them talking about how Notre Dame gave them a huge bump in season ticket sales that one year. Well, you had Notre Dame and Michigan on the same one. I mean, that was crazy. So to me, I think that if they play a home marquee non-conference game in years where they don't play Michigan at home, I think it makes perfect sense. And you want that money in hand, God only knows, you got to figure you're going to make the playoff at Ohio State 8 or 9 times out of 10 anyway. So just by throwing your helmets on the field. It is to note, backing Tony's point, that the last 2 national championship teams, Michigan and Ohio State, did not play a marquee non-conference opponent. So, and both got in. Michigan obviously was undefeated. Ohio State was 10-2. I think where playing Texas comes in is if that's one of your 2 losses and you're 10-2 and you lost to number 1 Texas, then you're the top 10-2 team, I would think, or right at the top of that when it comes in terms of seeding. And you may still even get, if they have buys, if it's, I guess they're eventually going to go to 14 or 16. You got to be in the top 2 if it's 14 to get a buy, but. A home game, whatever, the better seed would prevail. I think you help your seeding possibility by playing those games. So I don't think it's open and shut that those games are going to go by the wayside. I think that, they're good business sense for me in seasons where you want to have that boost for your season tickets.
But they do the dynamic pricing and the marquee game. Every year there's going to be a marquee game. It's just sometimes that marquee game is Michigan State or Nebraska. If there's nothing good on a non-conference and Michigan's on the road, like you'll still have Penn State, or you actually won't. Ohio State has always tried to have a marquee opponent. Sometimes that marquee opponent is Oregon State. Sometimes it is Cal. Sometimes it is Virginia Tech. But even in the earlier, even when we're not talking 5+11, they would still try to do this one marquee, and then the rest is whatever it is. If nobody else is doing that, and frankly, I'd say 80%, 75% of the programs, the major programs probably aren't, and so Ohio State still was. When Ross Bjork says there's no incentive to do that, and he's talking about, Steve, you're talking about getting season tickets and things like that, and people in the seats. We know with when Gene Smith was around, it's like as long as there are, I don't need 105,000. As long as there are 98,000 paying more than what 105,000 would with cheaper seats, that's fine. There's also TV money. We know season tickets, 15 years ago, you had to donate money to be able to buy season, just to be able to purchase season tickets. Now anybody can buy season tickets. That's how low demand has become since televisions have gotten better and prices have gone up and everything. So
the experience at the stadium sucks. Trying to get in, trying to get out.
So there's all kinds of reasons why demand has gone down, and so the season tickets are available to more people. But when Ross Bjork says that those games would likely go away, I'm going to have to believe him, because he's one of the guys involved in scheduling those, and coaches don't necessarily want them, because again, this could be a loss. This could knock me out of the playoffs. This could keep me out of the playoffs. And as long as I'm making the playoffs, I'm going to continue to get paid. But if I don't, there's a chance I won't. And that's why you see all of the SEC coaches are like, yeah, we don't want a ninth game. We don't want to have automatic qualifiers, because we're all qualified. We're the SEC. We could get 12 teams in. I think 4 plus the 4-4-2-2-1 it grants two conferences the majority of the automatic qualifiers, but in doing so, it preserves or creates what could be a better regular season. And as I mentioned before, we've talked about it here before. 30 years ago, all of the non-conference games were between all of the power schools. Ohio State was playing Missouri and Notre Dame and whatever, Pitt. There was never. Bowling Green, I don't think showed up until 97. Ohio State hadn't played an in-state school in forever, hadn't played MAC schools in forever. And then it became the norm. And I think it's going to continue to be even more the norm if you're not rewarding teams and also not punishing teams for losing to those big schools. And a loss against Texas for Ohio State is much more acceptable in a 4-4-2-2-1 than it is in a 5+11, even though, as Steve said, they're likely going to make the playoffs no matter what. 5+11 is better for Ohio State than a 4-4-2-2-1. But I'm talking about the entire college football sphere and the experience for fans week to week, when you get one of those weeks where it's like, gosh, there's nothing good. There's no big games. I think with the 5+11, you're going to have more of those weeks, and you're going to save. Most of the big weeks are going to be obviously your conference games.
I do not like the idea of the play-in. I think that is just ridiculously stupid, that you fight so hard to be 10-2 and you're the third team in the Big Ten, and now you got to play the sixth team that was 8-4 or something, or 9-3, and put your playoff berth on the line. If that's what I'm reading into this, mm-hmm. I hate that idea. I think that makes no sense to me. I don't know. It just doesn't make a bit of sense to me.
That's why you have to view the play-in games as playoff games. If you're in the play-in game, you're in the playoffs. It's just you got to start. You got a regional that you've got to get through first.
Yeah, don't like it.
You guys do a good job of counterbalancing me because I could produce 50 videos and probably have at this point on the subject, and I would never take into account the ticket situation at the stadium. I don't think about the home fans, and that is all valid and very important to those people, of course, and what the home schedule looks like. I simply look at this from what is fair, what's valid, what's legitimate to producing a playoff field. And for me, I don't like the 4-4-2-2-1-3 model because it assumes which conferences are best. Now, are those conferences going to be the best? Yes, it's almost certain. We know what recent history is, and then with the additions of the schools that have come in from the Big 12 and the West Coast, we just know that those are the best conferences. I understand that, but I hate the premise going into a season that we are elevating two conferences above two others, but it's realistic. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we're putting them on a pedestal. We have 1 year of data, and it was well earned last year, but I don't know.
I guess it was.
Yeah. I mean,
if you look at non-conference results, it's fairly inconclusive.
Yeah. Did Arizona State or who?
Arizona State showed up and probably played the second best team in the country to overtime and to the last play of the game. And that conference only had one shot. And you could look at 3 or 4 other teams in the Big 12, and Arizona State was probably the best team. They were the hottest team, but were they significantly better? Could there have been 3 other Big 12 teams that could have entered the playoffs and given Texas just as good a game? We have no idea, but there's evidence to say so.
Who is the ACC champion?
Clemson.
And Clemson and SMU both went 0-1. Is that right?
So the big wild card in this is what Tony's alluding to, and that's how is the playoff committee going to, if they've got free run of, okay, you got 5 conference champions and then boom, you've got 11 slots to fill. How are they going to evaluate these teams? Well, they gave us indication last year that Indiana gets in at 11-1, and I'm not debating that they should not have been in, but their schedule was horrific. And then we had SMU selected over Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss. Now, did those 3 teams have a better resume than SMU? Yes. However, SMU did advance to a conference championship game. They had a better record. And I don't know if the committee would stay with that thought process going forward, or was it just because they got boxed in by Alabama had just a horrendous, egregious loss. Ole Miss did as well. And then on top of it, they couldn't elevate South Carolina because they lost to Alabama. They were the hot team with the win against Clemson and some other good teams down the stretch and probably would have gotten the playoff spot, but they lost to Alabama and Ole Miss, so they couldn't put South Carolina in. So was it just circumstances that negated the SEC getting those teams in?
Yeah, I think there's that circumstance. And then also they did not want to punish anybody that made a conference championship game, which is also why I say just get rid of the conference championship games, put the top 2 teams in, and do the play-in games, because winning a conference championship did nothing for anybody other than got them in the playoff. Losing the conference championship game did nothing for anybody because it still got them in the playoff. So those games have become pointless. Now, can you change the markers on what you want to do? How does the committee choose those teams? Sure, but is it fair for this is the question I had going in. Is it fair for the team that loses in the Big Ten championship game to not make the playoffs, and then the number 3 team in the Big Ten to make the playoffs? That probably not. Although last year it would have been okay because Ohio State beat Penn State head to head, so maybe there would have been an argument there. But if you don't make that championship game, then you lose some of your argument. What we're seeing now is that the committee is going back and being told you need to worry more about strength of schedule, and we know what that means. You need to have more SEC teams in. That's what that is. This is just a way to put more of the focus on strength of schedule, which means SEC, as opposed to you lost to Vanderbilt and you lost to whomever, the bad Oklahoma, those bad losses should count, and we've seen it knock Ohio State out of the playoffs before in a 4-team, not the 12-team. But my last point is, in terms of the non-conference, to go back to that, say Ohio State and Texas played last year and Ohio State loses to Texas, they're not in the playoffs. So again, I'll go back to, don't expect a lot of Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Ohio State in the future with the 5+11.
Absolutely. As opposed to knowing that if we finish in the top 4 in the Big Ten, we're going to make the playoff. And I'm assuming that that's a top 4 in the conference in regards to conference record and as
Right.
opposed to top 4 in the rankings out
No,
of the conference.
Top 4 in conference. And also none of the Big Ten tiebreakers have any mention of your non-conference opponents. It's all Big Ten opponent adjusted. Like there's no, your record has nothing to do. The tiebreakers have nothing to do if you lost all 3 of your non-conference games. It's only the conference records in there. So that would another point that Ross Bjork says is a 4-4-2-2-1 takes a lot of control out of the committee, out of their hands, which some people like. We've seen a lot of people clamoring to get back to the computers. It's like they've forgotten how much people wanted to get away from the computers back then. But of course, back then it was just 2 teams, so you could understand it's probably more palatable now with 12, 14, or 16 teams to go by computers. But I think the more that you can take away from the committee and go based on who actually earns their way in, even though those slots are predetermined, I think that's a sacrifice you have to make to allow teams to earn their way in or earn their way out.
So you get a lot of teams in the SEC that schedule a big non-conference game, but then they also have another big non-conference game because they've got an ACC rival. You also have situations where Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois. Now, if a team in the Big Ten would do that, slip up like that, and also have scheduled a difficult non-conference game, they could lose 2 non-conference games. They could be 7-2 in the conference and be an 8-4 team that made the playoff.
You're eventually going to have some 14. I think you're probably going to have a 4-loss team in the playoff just because they may end up winning their conference. But in terms of like the ones that you mentioned where they have a good non-conference opponent and then they also have their end of the year like rival, I mean, you're talking Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. That's roughly it. Is that right? That have the South Carolina versus Georgia, Florida versus Florida State, Georgia versus Georgia Tech,
Kentucky, if they would ever be a factor.
But that's Louisville. I mean,
yeah.
So I mean that's a standard. I guess that would still count. So it's like, is Georgia Tech a major power? No. Is Florida State a major power at times? Those few schools do what every Big Ten school, or not every, do what a lot of Big Ten schools do anyway. So I don't think that's all that special or should be like, well, the other schools, the rest of like Texas sees that and they're like, well, we don't want that, or Oklahoma doesn't want that. Oklahoma and Texas are both playing Big Ten teams this year. So I think there's the athletic directors in the SEC want 4-4-2-2-1. The coaches don't, and that should tell you, that should give you all you need to know on like the ADs want it because it's more money. The coaches want it because want the 5+11 because it's more wins. And for the fans, that should tell you which would be more entertaining.
Yeah, again, the 5-11 leaves it wide open for the committee to make whatever interpretations, just like they did during the 14 playoff, where they had a list of items and bullet points that were the criteria that I completely understood. The issue was they applied the criteria different to whatever situation or whatever team they were evaluating. And I'm sure they would do the same in this case. I just can't get past elevating 2 conferences that have yet to step on the field and elevating them automatically without any games being played.
Well, I sorry to just completely bogard the conversation. One of the reasons I like the play-ins, and I maybe I've said that here before, is the 4-4-2-2-1 isn't really a 4-4-2-2-1. It's a 6-6-4-4. Like, so the Big Ten and the SEC get 6 teams in, the Big 12 and the ACC get 4. Is that more palatable for those two conferences? Like, you do have 4 teams that control their destiny. The Big Ten and the SEC have 6. Like, so like it's still just 2 teams different, but you get more. The Big 12 and the ACC have more opportunity. It's maybe semantics, but it's really not, because if you're in the play-in game, all you have to do is keep winning, and as long as you win a national championship.
Just the issue I have with that is that sometimes, especially in the Big Ten, you've got a significant drop in quality of teams, and you're giving an opportunity for that team, and they would have earned it in a sense, at least in terms of a late season push to win the play-in and then advance from there. But
Mark,
some of the teams
sometimes
we've seen in 6th place in the Big Ten.
As we know, the reason that 6th team is maybe not ranked is because the Big Ten is so difficult and they've lost to some really good teams, as opposed to the SEC where it's an easier road, so you have more ranked teams. Come on.
Yeah, I guess I didn't factor that in. That went right past me.
Come on, Mark.
I know.
Keep up.
What show are you doing
I'll
here?
try to
Come on.
catch on to this at some point. I've got a lot to learn.